Okay, let's talk about Mashiach, the Messiah, once he comes. We looked last class at a number of dire predictions about the time before the Mashiach arrives on the stage of world history. What we need to figure out now is what's going to be like when he comes. Well, we know it's going to be good because we already said we're going from choshech, from darkness, to Or, to light, from Laila Leboker, from birth pains to birth itself. And once the baby comes, we forget all about the pains and we just celebrate the arrival of the child. So too, we're going to see a number of amazing predictions that were made describing the arrival of Mashiach, okay? And we discussed one of them last class. Is going to be absolute shalom, peace, that is going to reign, we said, throughout the entire world. No more war. The prophet Isaiah tells us, if you remember, chapter 11, Isaiah, verse 6. But shalom is only good as a purpose. It's a kli, it's a vessel that allows us to do other things. Let's see what those other things are today, okay? We go together, friends? Great. Let's start with a verse from Ezekiel the prophet. Ezekiel the prophet had a lot to say about actually all the prophets that we have in our scriptures have a lot to say about Mashiach's arrival, which is why they're still in our scriptures canonized, although there were a million prophets throughout history, but they have been forgotten because their prophecies are not relevant anymore. Aviva, would you mind closing the door? I apologize so much.
I should just do it. Like, I need to...
Sorry. It's a mitzvah job though. It says Ezekiel the prophet, chapter 37:22. Vasit yotam legoy echad. You're going to become a unified nation. We're going to see tremendous unity among our people. Yeah, we're on page 75. Among the Jewish people, absolute unity, says the prophet. Now, if you ask me, that's the biggest miracle. Forget the temple being rebuilt, and forget the kibbutz galiyot, the fact we're all actually getting on and not killing each other, at least emotionally or spiritually. That's a good thing. Okay, we're going to make one nation, Bahar Yisrael, on the mountains of Israel. Umelech echad yeh lekulam. We're going to have one king who's going to rule over them. So unity is a prerequisite for all the good stuff that's going to come with Mashiach's arrival. Absolute achdut. Okay? Says the Rambam, well, that's only good if it gives us something else. What's the point of shalom in the world and us? Says the Rambam on page 76, and this is the Rambam from the Laws of Melachim, Laws of Kings, chapter 12, verse 5. Uvot hazman, lo yeh sham lo rav, there's going to be no more famine, v'lo milchama, no more war, v'lo kina, no more jealousy, v'lo tachrut, and no more competition, shatova, because all the good stuff in the world, tiyeh mushpat harbeh, it's going to be readily available. Readily available, whatever you need, all the good stuff that you need. Although, I mean, today it probably is already. We just haven't figured out how to distribute it evenly to the entire world. But we have the resources right now in the world to, feed the entire world and take care of everyone, right? For a long time. The cholamadanim and all the delicious bounties and delicacies, right? Mitsuyan ka'afar, we found like dirt. Be everywhere, very available. V'lo esek kol ha'olam. And the entire world will only have one job. El ladat et Hashem bilvad. At that point, the only thing we're going to have to really do with all the great blessings that we have is to know God. That's it. That's it. Knowledge of God. Lefika, says the Rambam. Therefore, Yu Yisrael chachamim gedolim. The Jewish people are going to be great chachamim, great wise people. The yodim devar mastumim, and they're going to reveal secrets which are hidden away, and understand all the deepest secrets of existence. Are you already seeing this, right? We're unwrapping some of the greatest secrets of science and world history and information, right? Being able to bring sight to the blind, which is messianic in and of itself, hearing to the deaf, curing diseases, visiting. In 100 years ago, we were just figuring out how to fly, and now we're curing all these. If I told you right now, 5 years' time, no more blind people, you'd be like, that's possible. It's like, yeah, that's in the realm of possibility. No more deaf people. If I told you in a few years, no more cancer, and it's Hashem, you're like, yeah, I hear that. No more crazy people. That's harder to believe. But the other stuff is definitely possible. The Sigu Dat Boram Kefi Koach Adam. Everyone's going to be able to attain knowledge of God according as much as is humanly possible. Shneimar, as it says in Isaiah the prophet, he's going to quote the prophet Isaiah, chapter 11, verse 9, which means he's where he's getting this information from. Ki mala aras de'at et Hashem. The world is going to be full of the knowledge of God. Et Hashem kamayim liyam chasm, just as the rivers and the oceans cover the entire seabed. Okay? And we know from Isaiah the prophet, we mentioned this prophecy before, chapter 2, verse 2. Notice, by the way, this occurs at the beginning of the prophecy of Isaiah, because Isaiah is not written chronologically, it's written according to impact. So Isaiah the prophet begins with what's going to happen right at the beginning. And he's going to say, or most importantly, it's going to happen at the end of days, that we know the temple is going to be rebuilt, and non-Jews are going to come and seek God there. Well, how are they going to seek it? Through teachings of Torah. Well, who's giving that? The Jewish people. We're going to be an Or LaGoyim. We've been trying to do it, somewhat successfully, somewhat unsuccessfully, for thousands of years. That's going to become our main thing. Ki mitzion, tzisa Torah, u'devar Hashem Yerushalayim. Those words are specifically about the end of days when Mashiach has come. Okay? So knowledge is going to increase. Says the Pri Tzedek, Rav Tzadok says, by the way, right now they know the Bible. They have a pretty good idea of what's happening. It's like every hotel room's got, some Bible knocking around in it. However, it means that what's going to really change is the oral Torah. That which is uniquely Jewish is going to become extremely well known. The main revelation of the oral law will be through Mashiach. Right? So Rav Tzadok, as it says in Kohelet, Rabbah, Midrash, all the Torah that you can learn in this world is there's nothing better than the Torah in Olam Haba. Because it's going to be a lot more prominent. So information and knowledge is going to be out there. Okay? So that's the main purpose for all the Shalom, so that wisdom, not just knowledge, but wisdom can be prevalent. Yes?
When it says that we'll attain knowledge of Hashem as much as humanly possible, does that change from now to when Mashiach comes? Like how much we're actually able to?
Not until once he comes, it changes. What you're seeing today in the pre-Messianic era, and we're on the cusp, as you know, I believe very, very strongly, from the signs we looked at, but we're seeing that the level of Torah scholars and the stories we have of Torah, unfortunately, Tisrach, says the Mishnah, has become lessened and denigrated, but there's no doubt about it. The amount of Torah knowledge that's out there on a much lower level and information is, so it's like, it used to be like, think of it as it used to be like pyramid. Few people on top and the masses know anything. Now it's like an inverted pyramid. There's lots of people, but the real scholars is much, much less. But general knowledge of Torah information is very prevalent now.
I think she's asking about our capabilities, like what is humanly possible with that, or maybe not. But
Once Mashiach comes, once he comes, prophecy we're going to see is going to return, and then we're going to get a much higher level.
Because aren't we, when Mashiach comes, that's like the world is in its perfected pace.
Yeah, but it's going to take time. It's going to evolve over time once that comes.
So it's not like right away?
No, I don't think so. Well, prophecy is going to return, but it's going to take time. It's going to take time. Yeah, it doesn't have to, it's not like a light switch, right? That's why you go from night to day. It takes time, there's dark, you know what I'm saying? There's dawn and then early morning, right? Then the highest part of the day. So it takes time. Okay. Connected to this, we come to a very big question based upon Pesukim in the Torah, which is a major thing. Now we're going to see a machloket, a dispute here from the Kabbalists and the non-Kabbalists, aka the rationalists they call them. And that is, so what's going to happen to the Yetzer Hara once Mashiach comes? We know we're going to have peace. We know Torah knowledge is going to be manifest very clearly. But what happens to the Yetzer Hara? What's going to be like? Because if we really know there's a God, then, and it's really clear and evident, which it will be a lot more at that time, the veil is being lifted up, seemingly the chance to Aveira, sins, is going to be diminished, or maybe even disappear, right? And let's have a look at the Torah prophecy from Moshe Rabbeinu to describe this, and then let's look at some of the commentators who understand it, and we're going to see the Rambam and the Ramban, Nachmanides and Rambam, are going to have a little machloket over this idea. So the Torah tells us in Sefer Devarim, chapter 30, verse 6, Deuteronomy, Lamed Vav, Umal Hashem Elokecha et levavcha. God is going to mal. What does mal mean? Mal is lashon milah. Circumcise your heart. God is going to say, well, how do you circumcise a heart? So that's not obviously not a physical circumcision. That is a spiritual removing of negative. What is a brit milah? Right? It's a sign, it's a covenant, and it's removing this piece of skin which represents the Yetzer Hara. So too, there's going to be a non-physical circumcision of your heart. It's a very, very famous idea of God circumcising your heart. Have you experienced circumcision of the heart? He's removing the bad stuff that you believe or know. At that time, Umal Hashem Elokecha, Hashem himself is going to circumcise et levavcha, vet levav zerecha, and the hearts of your children, la'ahava, which will allow you to love et Hashem Elokecha, the Lord your God, b'chol levavcha, or b'chol nafshcha, l'man chayecha, in order that you shall live. And the living here is obviously a. So this is not a heart circumcision. God is not particularly like doing, heart surgery. Oh, actually, I don't know. Maybe it's the real heart surgery. This is what it's all about. Right? God is a, cardiac surgeon. Who knows? So the Rambam says the following words based upon this. And the Gemara has a lot to say about this idea as well. But the Rambam, he says, okay, now let's go back. If you remember, how do we start the semester? In Gan Eden. So now we're making our way back. We went through a lot of history. We had Torah. We had mitzvah. We've been through a lot to get to this point in our semester and in Jewish history. And he says, Ki mizman habriya, says the Rambam, from the dawn of creation, haytaru shubiyad adam, people have the ability, right, to do as they wish, says the Rambam, right? Lasot, kretzonot, tzadik or rasha, whether good or bad. We know this from the Ramchal. We have free will. The whole Zman Torah ken, and the entire time that we have the Torah is the same. Kedei sheyeh lahem zchut. Why did God create an evil inclination, the desire to not do good, so that we can choose good and get rewarded for it? You can't be rewarded for the good unless you have a desire to do bad. And you can't be punished for the bad unless there's a possibility that you can do good. It's just the way it goes. So we have this thing called Bechira, we said, and it must come by nature but that God set up the world with free will decisions. Good? Sound familiar? B'tov, they choose good. Va'onesh, right? Or they get punished for doing bad. Ritzot bara. Aval Yemot Mashiach. But when the Mashiach comes, says the Ramban, Tiyah b'chira b'tov lehem teva. This decision to do good is going to come not through a hard, challenging free will decision, but through a teva decision, a natural will. Naturally, you're going to choose good. In your course books that I'm sure you've already read, which I gave you in the semester, we talk about from free will to natural will. Well, what's the difference? What's the difference between free will, bechira, and this idea of choosing because of teva, a natural will? So yeah, bechira betov lehem teva. Lo yitavel lehem halev, your heart will not desire lema she'en ra'i, that which is not ra'i, which is fitting for it. The lo yachpot b'klal is not going to desire it whatsoever. You're not going to desire to do good. That's the Ramban, is what Moshe Rabbeinu meant when he said to the Jewish people, in the future, God is going to circumcise your heart. He's going to remove the Yetzer Hara. So the Ramban said, yeah, but let me explain what I mean. That means you're going to choose good and stay away from evil naturally. What does that mean? What is that even talking about?
Like, good will be so obvious that you wouldn't choose something else. Like, there's no gray area.
There's no gray area. Choosing big, just like we saw Adam Rishon did have free will, but it was much, much smaller because Tov was a lot more prominent. Yeah?
I was just going to ask if Adam Rishon had free will.
You have to say he had free will. You cannot say he didn't, because he chose to eat from the... It was different. The Yetzer Hara, as represented by the Nachash, by the snake, was outside of him. Okay, so that was... He wasn't as... Now it became inside, it became a lot more murky and grey. I mean, people say, well, it's hard to understand that because we live in a world which is all struggle and all difficulty, you know. How do we feature? Well, there is a level of this. We all, to some degree, I hope, have a level where we have a natural will to do the right thing, yeah? For example, does anybody here have a desire to kill somebody else? Oh, we have moments. But we don't really have that desire. So that means I don't have free will decision to kill someone? Well, I still do. I mean, I could theoretically walk around the streets of Manhattan and shoot people to death, right? A person could, please don't. But a person could choose that. But I just don't, that's just not a challenge for me. I mean, that, I think it's fair to say, is a natural, that's become a natural, it's not like a free will decision. I'm not going to kill someone purposefully, heaven forbid, right? Even if I have a little spark to, I could knock his block off, right? But I can't, in other words, we've overcome that challenge. And therefore the desire for most people, I hope, is not to just run through the streets killing other individuals for no purpose and no reason. I'm not talking self-defense, we're talking about, maliciously murdering other people. So that would be an example where I still have free will, but my natural has overcome. Now, you can do that with every mitzvah, okay? You may have a desire to eat non-kosher, but, I just don't have a desire right now to walk into McDonald's, right? You get to a point where you've conquered that Yetzer Hara. Is it possible that someone could have that with Lashon Hara? I mean, I can't even fathom it, but it's got to be possible. They get to a point where I'm not going to speak Lashon Hara because, there's tzaddikim who don't speak, because for me, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is so... I met such people who don't speak Lashon Hara, ever. I've met such people. I know who they are, okay? And they just don't speak Lashon Hara. So for them, they may have a little tingling of a free will decision they have to make, but at some point it becomes a natural will. It moves from Bechira to Teva. Those are the two words we're saying over here. So he's saying when Mashiach comes, this Mal Hashem Elokecha is actually a reference to the free will decisions we're going to be going through. Yeah.
So if the good is going to be so obvious and we're always going to want to choose that, will we know the reason? Like kashrut?
1,000%.
We're going to know why.
You have a lot more knowledge. We know that a prerequisite for all of this is a tremendous knowledge of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and His Torah. Yeah, there's going to be a lot more knowledge and wisdom that's going to be out there. No doubt about that, sister.
Or what'll be we'll just do it because we know that it's the right thing.
No, there's going to be a lot of knowledge attached to this. And maybe that's going to be the catalyst. Because when you know a lot more, you'll suddenly, for sure. Okay. So, he carries on and says, we're gonna this design for that is not going to be there. We're only going to want to do the good stuff. Now, if that's true, then there's no decision which will lead to merit and demerit. Because merit and demerit only applies in a world where there is a choice. And that choice, when the Ramban's going to say it a little differently, but the Ramban says it's done. It's done. Olam Hazeh is different to Olam Haba. Olam Hazeh is fight good and evil, whether in the world or in yourself. And Mashiach is going to rid the world of both. He's going to remove all evil from the world, Amalek as a physical nation, and all the negative influence of this world. All false religions are gone, but also the internal struggle that we have all the time, every single day, every decision is going to be removed as well, as we say. Because merit and demerit are based upon desire, and desires are going to change.
Demerit is punishment?
Demerit is chova, yeah, making mistakes, and that's going to be gone. Okay. The prophet Ezekiel makes it even clearer, and he says, "V'natati lachem leiv chadash." I will give you a new heart. There's a heart thing again, right? So Moshe Rabbeinu described it as a circumcision of the heart. So the Yechezkel, I think, is clarifying this and saying that in those days, chapter 36, verse 26 of Ezekiel the prophet, "V'natati lachem leiv chadash." I'm going to give you a new heart. We're all going to get heart transplants. V'ruach chadasha, and a new spirit. Aten bekirbachem, inside you. These are not literal. Okay. Vasiroti et lev even. I'm going to remove the heart of stone, mibsarchem, from your flesh. V'natatirchem lev basar, and you'll get the one of flesh. Okay, your heart will not be hardened, right? And that idea of a heart being hardened, we know from Paro, right? During the latter 5 makot means the resistance and the desire not to do the right thing, even in the face of things being very clearly going that way, right? And Rashi on this piece of Yechezkel the prophet says, Leiv Chadash, what is this new heart? Rashi says, I just said today, Yetzer Shenchadesh Tovah. This is the desire that will be renewed in order to do good. Al heart is going to be renewed in order for you to do good. So we have a new state of affairs that is going to be ushered in by Mashiach. Okay? Seemingly contradicts the entire world and everything that's happened up to now. So the purpose of the Messianic era, therefore, is to, as we said at the beginning, earn reward. V'yesh kan she'ila. We have a fundamental question, says Hashem Shmuel, right? Since there's no opportunity to earn reward, you can get to receive, not to earn reward during the Messianic era, and yet, time for receiving reward for mitzvah, what we do today, will not have arrived, because Mashiach hasn't arrived yet. So the era of Mashiach is therefore Tikkun Olam, the final fixing up of the entire world, where the nature of peace, of shalom, outside in the world, inside our inner world, that's why I look at it, right? It's outside world, inside world, is going to change. Right? It's going to be an absolute level of clarity, and all of that's going to come from the Tikkun Olam. That's why the Ramchal says, aha, now I get it. This effort required to earn perfection. First of all, man has to bring himself and the world back to the state in which they existed before the sin of Adam Harishon. Okay, and then he can raise themselves up from this state to a level of perfection. When you talk about Tikkun Olam, this is actually what you're talking about. This is it. Right? It's not hugging trees. Well, that's, a fine thing to do if that's what, you enjoy. Or saving dolphins, that's also great, right? Or removing plastic from oceans, that's all so fantastic. And these are good things, these are potentially mitzvot. But that's not Tikkun. Tikkun Olam means you're now perfecting creation and the world. Through your actions, the world itself has changed through the arrival of the Mashiach. So Rav Dessler talks about this when he says, that's how we ultimately fix the sin. Basically, all of world history, as we said from the beginning, is coming to this point. This is the end. It's the punchline, right? I mean, the way I look at it, actually it's not me, the way anyone looks at it is like a joke, isn't it? It's an absolute joke. What does that mean? A joke always has three parts, right? A joke has three parts. There is the premise. That marker, that's a joke. We have the premise that makes it happen. Then you have the actual body information, right? How to translate that, right? The actual event. Then you have the punchline. That's how a joke works. You have the premise. If you want, this is the thesis. Then you have the antithesis. The antithesis. And then it comes together for the synthesis. This is the way I like to pick it up, right? You have the beginning, middle, and the end. It's a three-part system. And we said all of world history happens to be three parts. With the 2,000 years, 2,000, 2,000 years. So these two are very different because the premise and the event itself, right? The body of the joke is completely opposite. You start with an idea. Every story, every movie is always the same thing. You start with a premise, and that's broken down by the event. But then you get to reach the punchline, right? Which is, if you want, a reproduction of the premise, just done differently. That's the way it comes. I mean, this idea of it being a joke is actually not so far off. Right? We know that. This idea of laughter and Mashiach are deeply connected. The idea of laughter and Mashiach are deeply connected. Az yamale schok pinu. Then our mouths will be full of laughter. Az, what does az mean? Az always means then. Az means then, in the future. Az yamale schok, right? Because it's 7 and 1 is 8. 8 represents the spiritual realm, right? Olam haba. So az means in the future. Az, then we're going to laugh. Yitzchak. What does lashon of Yitzchak mean? There will be laughter. Why are they telling me this? Why is Torah Melech saying right? So there's an idea of right now you don't see it, but you will. We have the very famous Gemara at the end of Gemara Makot. Every yeshiva boy learns this. When Rabbi Akiva and the other Chachamim are standing by the destroyed temple. Remember this whole story? And what happens? They're all crying. And Rabbi Akiva is? He's laughing. And they're like, why are you laughing? He's like, why are you crying? I don't want me crying. Temple's destroyed. Look at it. The Romans have destroyed the second base of Mikdash. The first one was destroyed by the Babylonians. Look what's happened over here. Foxes are wild animals are roaming our holy temple, destroying it. How did this happen? And Rabbi Akiva said, that's why I'm laughing. Because right now it's bad. You're stuck over here. But he says, the idea of laughter will come. What is laughter? Since we're talking about it, let's get a little bit deep today. You can handle it. What is something funny? What makes something funny? Even by the way, if it's a terrible thing. Right. Someone, yeah. It's surprising. You never saw it coming. Right? That's what makes it funny. That's why everyone tells me Jewish jokes. I'm like, they're not funny because I've heard them all before. Right? My father, should live and be well, has one joke he keeps telling, which I can't say publicly, right? But you know what I'm saying? He says it 50 times. It's just like, okay, fine. You know what I'm saying? The first time I heard it, back in the 1980s, right? Although every time he tells it, he laughs as well. So it makes me laugh as well, even so. Right? Because it's surprising. It all turns around. It's all going one way, and then it turns around. I didn't see it coming. That's when something becomes funny. Right? When that person's walking down the street with a beautiful suit on and the hat, and everything's fantastic, and they hit a banana peel, and they fall down the floor, you're laughing. Why is that funny? It's terrible. Someone just fell down, and you can't stop laughing. Even the person who runs over to pick them up is like, it's horrible. Why? Because you don't expect it to happen. It's the unexpected. That's why Purim happens to be the messianic holiday. We know that all the books of Tanakh of Nach, not Tanakh, not Torah, but all the books of Nach are going to disappear when Mashiach comes, because they're foretelling us, except, says the Rambam, Megillat Esther, yeah. Because Megillat Esther has the seeds of what the redemption is and will be. And that's why, if you look at the prom story, it's a terrible story. It's not funny at all. Jews about to be killed, we just managed to get saved. Why are we laughing at that holiday? The way it happens. It's all going one way, we're about to be destroyed with Haman's decree and Achashverosh's compliance with it, and then, boom, it all turns around. V'nahafachu. V'nahafachu is what makes it funny. A sad, terrible story, but it's funny because it all turns around. So you have thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis. The Messianic era is the synthesis. That means it's not a different part, it's the culmination of these two. You've got to get to this until you be to these two. Happens to be, by the way, that the thesis is Abraham, the antithesis is Yitzchak, because he's the one, Yitzchak, there will be laughter. He's Mr. Antithesis. He's the one who's willing to kill himself, literally on the Akedah, for the whole cause. That's the antithesis, that's the event itself. And then Yaakov puts it all together. Yaakov is the one who is the synthesis who brings it all together. So Abraham is the thesis, the idea he introduced God into this world. Yitzchak was the one who's about the hard work. And then Yaakov brings it all together. He synthesizes his grandfather's father. That's why Yaakov becomes, in this week's parasha, Yisrael. He begins to represent it all. Because what represents this whole thing? It's not the premise, that's just an idea. And it's not the event, because that's the antithesis, that's hard work. This represents it all. That's why we're B'nai Yisrael. Right? And with the Ben and the Beit Yaakov. We're together. So that's how Akiva saw it. That's why, what does Sarah Imenu do? She laughed. She laughed. And David HaMelech says there will be laughter. Laughter is not happiness. Laughter is a reaction to new circumstances. First you laugh, like, I couldn't believe it. And that's why she's in trouble. When she laughed, she's like, it can't be. She was revealing her essence by laughing at that time. That's actually what was going on.
But laughter is happiness.
Not necessarily.
But they're together.
They can be. You want them to be. Avinu laughed as well, and he didn't get into trouble. When he was told he was going to have a kid at his age, and she was going to, he laughed, but he was in trouble for his laughter, because his laughter came from, says Umklus Simcha. It came from happiness.
It could be
Later on, by the way, Sarah did laugh again when she had a child, and then it was with happiness, and that's when the child was called Yitzchak. And Yitzchak doesn't mean there is, because there is no laughter here. There will be. That's why us means in the future. Right now, we're suffering, but there will be a time, he prophetically told us, because he didn't even get to see the second Beit HaMikdash, his son built it, but he said at some point there will be a final redemption. And he knew that because we will have to go back to Gan Eden at some point.
So there's nothing after Mashiach.
The world, we're going to talk, that's Olam Haba. Olam Haba begins.
And that's it.
All that continues.
And it never ends.
And never ends. Actually, there's going to be a 7th millennium and an 8th one, which the Ramchal is going to talk about a little bit, but he says we can't even fathom it. There's very little written on Tcheta Metim, because the prophets never saw Ayin L'Ra'ah. So it's very, very hard to even fathom that. Mashiach we can figure out, because that's very. But he said Tcheta Metim. You just read a few verses at Ezekiel, and then you just got to move on, because we're going to do like one class in Tcheta Metim. It's really not much to say. We just don't know. It's beyond our mortal comprehension.
Well,
And we'll talk about after that, and when that happens, and how long that lasts for, and there's another millennia after that.
but isn't the whole point of death that it's like the period between when your soul gets back to your body?
Yeah.
And if the world is not reward and punishment anymore, then like, what are we?
What's the point of death?
Yeah,
Good question.
because we have nothing to get.
It's not nothing, you have
rewarded for.
everything. You know, it's like, I always say, people always say, because it just sounds terrible, right? It does sound terrible. What's the point of it all? It's like someone in prison, you know? It's like that, was that movie? The Shawshank Redemption. You know, there's something which is based upon an idea called people being institutionalized. People are so used to being in prison that when they get out, they want to get back in. People reoffend. Most people leave prison, they say, reoffend. Why? Because they want to get back in, because in prison there's no responsibility. You get 3 square meals a day and that's the end of it. So this idea that you can enjoy freedom. That's why many of the Jewish people did not want to leave Egypt. Most didn't leave Egypt. Right? And even once they left, the ones that did leave, want to go back. So why would you want to go back to prison? Why would my daughter's doing a social work degree at work, so why are you? So she's doing this semester online. So I hear the stuff that I'm like, oh my God, how depressing. Like all the stories and stuff. So you hear these stories, and I hear them of battered women. You know, I've seen women who've been through tremendous abuse, and they go back. Like, why would you do that? Or I deal with couples in terrible marriages, right? Who go through it, and they go out and they go back, and I'm like, why would you go back in? You know it's not good for you. Right? There's something to that. People want to, that's what we're like, we're the same. Sounds ridiculous. I would never do that. We are. I'm like, I'd rather be in a place of no responsibility with all of these problems rather than the unseen future or the freedom. Right? Because with freedom comes, we said, responsibility. That's not easy, that's a lot.
But we have freedom now.
Oh, really?
Well, we have the Torah.
You don't have freedom right now. We are all held in chains by the Yitzhara.
Right, but that gives us free will. When Mashiach comes, we
Oh,
don't
so
have
when
that.
Mashiach comes, that's done.
So then, what's the freedom then?
There
You're
is
not
the
choosing
outer.
between two
So I'm
things.
saying the freedom is you won't have to fight the Yitzhara anymore. You're not in prison anymore. You have to enjoy. We can't even fathom it.
Yeah.
It's outside of us because we've been in prison for so long, right? We've been, it's just like that little kid who grows up in a room without seeing anything else. There's a whole world outside there. Or turning into a fetus in the womb, the famous Chazal, right? And so there's the whole world. Are you crazy? It's not this world at all. You're breathing air. Air? What's that? I'm living on liquid right now. Oh no, air's fantastic. Your breathing is amazing. There's nothing out there at all. This is all there is. I'm being fed night and day, and what else do I need? But you don't have freedom. You're just sitting here, just like, It's a problem. That's the idea of getting used to galut. So Rav Dessler says that's how we fix the sin of Adam Rishon. Man has to exert effort to rise above the concealment of nature we spoke about. Yep. By my power and strength of my hand, because right now we feel as though all of our accomplishments come from us. Right? We don't see a Kadosh Baruch Hu running the world, and we see ourselves as ruling over nature. Okay. We have control over the entire world. Right? But he says that's going to change. Okay? That will change, and that's going to be the bridge to Olam Haba. So what is that going to be like? So look at page 79, and then we'll move, because now Mashiach has arrived, now Olam Haba begins. So before we get to Olam Haba, this era of Mashiach will be a time for the fulfillment of Torah mitzvot, even as the nature of free will changes. Because in the Rambam's terms, the natural will, we said, that flows from a clear recognition of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's will. Right? And that's the avodah of that time, the perfect service. Then we are to ascend in level after level. He says, Az yale aliyah acha aliyah alidei avot Hashem, through that service at that time, to a time, as the Ramchal says, to a time that we would have achieved had Adam Harishon not sinned. Okay. The Rambam disagrees. He says there'll be a reduction of the free will. The Ramban says it's gone completely. Okay? Thoughts, questions, comments? We have another 10 minutes and then I gotta run. Yes.
Do you realize that people have so much free will?
Today, it's a postulate. You have to say we have free will. Today, we do have free will. I mean, you can go a little bit deeper and say, well, do we really? We're controlled by things and forces outside of ourselves. But people, we believe that people have bechira. They can make moral, and now how are we defining free will? Free and ethical moral decisions. That is a basic concept of humanity. I mean, you can say, the Gemara says so, right, that Hakol b'dei Shemayim, chutz mi'yirat Shemayim, that everything's in the hands of heavens, except for the fear of heaven, which means that God will put us in circumstances and times and challenges and places, but ultimately the decisions we make at those times and places and situations is up to us.
In terms of good and evil, or in terms of like
In terms of moral, ethical, good and evil, yeah. Yeah, that's the window of free will we're talking about. Circumstances and everything else, and parnasah, and success with wealth and health, that's in Hashem's hands. But what we do when we're dealt those cards, that's in our hands. That's what we mean when we say bechira, free will. Yeah.
So it keeps saying that the world will go back to what it was before Adam sinned.
And had Adam not sinned, it will be the continuation
So
of it. That's
what is
correct.
that?
This is what we're trying to figure out. We're not there yet. We don't know because we never achieved it. Yeah.
Why would we want to fix the world if like we can't merit from it, and like if Allah says over?
You are repeating it, Lana's a very good question, which, I mean, we have an answer, but it's not as good as the question. The answer is that ultimately, that's what we're here to do. We're here to, I'm not here to do. That's why Hashem created the world, for us to receive His good. That's what we're here for. There was just a mess up at the beginning, and we had to spend all of history dealing with the consequence of that mess up, of that mistake. But ultimately, we're here to enjoy this world, right? And that's what Olam Haba is going to be.
So when's Gog and Magog?
So Gog and Magog, which we left out with the chapter in the book on it, is before or once Mashiach arrives. Those are the battles that will prove he is Mashiach.
So not
That's
everyone.
pre-messianic.
So not everyone's getting to Mashiach.
No, the people will be dead for a long time. Of course not.
I'm saying like now, if it were to come tomorrow, who merits to be there?
Hashem made that ultimate decision. Who's going
But
to
like,
get
what
to?
could you do to have the zchut to
So
do
we
it?
said, we looked at that already, right? We looked at those Gemaras. Remember Ula and Rabbah? We said Ma'asim Tovim, specifically Bein Adam Lachaveiro. Right? We know that will destroy the Beit HaMikdash of Sinat Chinam. So the opposite of that, Avad Yisrael is going to rebuild it and give us a chance to be alive for it. And that's going to save us from the tribulations and the trials
I have another question.
of Gog and Magog.
So then it says like in the Siddur, Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David.
Okay, so Mashiach ben Yosef, I don't go into too much this semester. It's a whole little area of itself. That's already different. That already is not even necessarily an individual. Rav Kook, who spoke a lot about this, said it's a time. It's a zman. Okay? That will occur where we're going to see a lot of change occur. Again, if you look in the Siddur, it does talk about someone called Armilus, who is some kind of enemy who's going to come and attack. Truth be told, until it actually occurs, we don't know. But we know that there will be some kind of battle, and Mashiach ben Yosef could potentially die. That's what we mentioned on Tefillah, that he shouldn't die at that time. That's not Mashiach ben David. Mashiach ben David is a given human person, 1,000%. Mashiach ben Yosef is a more, I don't say a vague area of Jewish thought that we're not too sure about.
Why Yosef?
Also, what's Yosef connection to something? Okay, that's a whole different discussion. Not for now. That's a whole different. How he ended up mixed up in this whole thing is another question. That's why we focus more on Mashiach ben David from Yehuda. Any other thoughts, questions, comments, heckles? Okay, marvelous. So we have a few minutes left. So do we begin the new topic? Okay, let's do it. Let's just start something. I just leave a little bit early. Hope you don't mind. I apologize. Okay. The idea of Olam Haba. So when we talk about Olam Haba, we're actually talking about three potential things. Okay? Olam Haba, we already said, right, is actually three potential things. One, where the soul goes when a person dies. That really isn't what we mean when we say Olam Haba, truth be told. That's really Gan Eden, is what it's referred to. Or Olam Ha-Neshamot, the world of souls. We're going to talk about that actually, because it's still relevant, right? 2 is Yemot HaMashiach. But even that's not so accurate, because Olam Haba, this begins it. Really, Olam Haba is after Chiyat HaMeitim, resurrection of the dead. That's really what we're talking about. Resurrection of the dead is really what we're talking about when we talk about Olam Haba. That's when it really fully begins. There's a judgment. We'll talk about Yom Hadin, Hanorah. That's going to come. That comes with that time. Let's just have a look at some of the sources from hinted at in the Torah and in the Gemara and Tanakh of this concept of the existence of Olam Haba. So now let's talk about this first one, where this all goes to. We know, we're going to see that Shlomo Melech says that the body goes into the ground, but the soul lives on. Okay, that is a basic premise. As he says in Kohelet, chapter 12, verse 7, Vayeshav ha'afar la'aretz, the dust returns to the earth, because that's what we're made from, kashaya, as it was, v'haruach, and the spirit, tashuv el hakem asher natana, goes back to God. So the existence of life after death is a given in Jewish thought. Okay? Right? Or life after life, actually, is probably the better description of it. There's actually a very interesting diuk we see, that means an inference we see in the Torah. Look at this amazing inference. We know that Avraham Avinu died and Yitzchak died, but he used a very unusual language in their description of their death. The Yigva, Abraham expired, got very, very old. V'yamat, and he died. B'seva tova, at a good, mature, and content age. Zaken, he was old when he died. V'saveya, and he was content with his life's accomplishments. V'yasef elamav, he was gathered to his people. And then it says, V'yikbru oto, he was buried by Yitzchak and Ishmael. Yitzchak, his son Yitzchak, and his son Ishmael buried him. By the way, we learn from this that Ishmael does teshuvah at the end of days, because he came back to his father. And the Bnei Ishmael, the Arabs, will come back as well. Okay? That's Ishmael. We did that already, yeah? And obviously, where did he buried? And they buried him, El Mart HaMachpelah, that was the place where he buried his wife Sarah. Remember the whole story, right? Where she saw Adam HaRishon and Chava were buried in as well. There's four couples that are buried in there. Which was where? In the field of Ephron, Ben Socha, Hachiti, Ashal, Pnei, and Mamre. Okay, so Avraham Avinu, this was the first acquisition, financial acquisition of a piece of land of Israel, and Avraham Avinu did it. There's an extra language over there. What does it say? He got old, fine. He'd reached the end of his years, okay. Then he died, and he's gathered to his people, and then he's buried. What's extra over there? What's extra? What didn't need to be told?
Buried?
Well, buried is the mitzvah. Buried is the most important part, isn't it? You can only bury someone who's dead, and burial is the mitzvah. Right? So it can't be buried. And we need to know where he's buried. Well, he dies important because you don't want to bury someone who's not dead.
It says expire and...
Expired it does say, but that means he started to lose his consciousness, I guess, you could say it that way. What is this gathered to his people? What does it even mean? It can't mean burial, because that's Vigbru. And it can't mean died, because he told us, met, he's died. So in between death and burial, He's gathered to his people. Can you see it? What does the extra lashon say with Yitzchak? Yitzchak lived 180 years. He died. V'yigva Yitzchak v'yamat. So for the Pesach of the Torah. V'yasef alam, he gathered to his people. V'zakem savei yamim v'yikbru ato Esav v'Yaakov b'nav. And his sons, Esav and Yaakov, bury him. What is this? Look at this unbelievable piece. The Yosef alamav gathered to his people. Hu hanefesh. This is his soul. Shenasaf im nefeshot kerovim v'tzadikim, which are now gathered together with the souls of all the righteous ancestors that came before. You hear this? When a person dies, they get to see family. That's what the Torah is telling us. Shekasha nefesh, because when the soul is in the body, he nefredet mishar nefeshot, it's separate from all the other souls. Shem b'li guf, that are without a soul, without a body. So have all these souls that are without a body, and when you're inside your body, you can't connect to those souls. Oh! Or when you get separated from the guf, nitcharva im shar nefeshot, you're able now to nitchabra, to attach to all these other souls, shenefadot min guf kamoha, that are separated from the body, just like it. Gathering to the people means he met his mishpacha. He got to see his father again, and his grandmother, and Noach, and Shem, and Ham, and Nefet, and whoever was, and Metushelach, whoever came before him, that he was family of and related to. That's the idea from the. It's a hint. Remember, Olam Haba, and we'll see a few reasons why is not explicitly mentioned, but it is inferenced, and this is one of the famous inferences that the soul lives from the Torah. From the Torah, it's explicit in Ketuvim and the Navi, right? That's what Shlomo Melech was telling us. That even the Torah hints at the fact that the soul lives on afterwards and actually gets to connect to other souls that predecease it. So all those stories you've heard of people having NDEs, near-death experiences, yeah, and they see family members. Crazy stuff, right? That they didn't teach in yeshiva. Ask it in the Rabbi Andrew as a teacher in yeshiva, did you? Okay, I'm going to have to stop a little bit early. I apologize. We're going to pick this up with an amazing story next time about someone who did actually get called back into this world in order to have a conversation. We'll see the next class, Mr. Hashem.